The morning Thea Dunbar found out she'd been fired, she also found out her cousin had taken her job, her desk, and, for reasons that would only become clear 6 hours later, her entire identity. Not literally. Thea still had her name, her cheap transit card, and a blazer with a split seam she'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. What Mira had taken was everything else. The recommendation letter Thea had spent 2 years earning from the VP of Finance. The client files Thea had rebuilt from scratch after the server crash in January, and the performance review that was supposed to get Thea the promotion that would have finally let her afford a 1-bedroom that didn't share a wall with someone else's argument. Thea didn't cry when HR handed her the termination notice. She'd used up her crying budget in February, when her mother called to say she'd given Mira Thea's old bedroom and converted Thea's childhood things into a craft room. "You snooze, you lose, sweetheart." That was a direct quote. She signed the forms. She handed back her keycard. She took the elevator down 14 floors and stood on Bay Street in the November rain with a cardboard box and no umbrella and thought, well, there it is. The box contained a stapler she'd bought herself, a mug that said, "I survived audit season," that was not technically true, and 6 months of handwritten ledger notes that HR hadn't thought to confiscate because nobody in that office understood what they were for. Thea understood. Thea was very good with numbers. It was frankly the one thing about herself she'd never doubted. She went to a bar. Not a nice bar. A bar in a basement on King Street, where the stools were mismatched, and the lighting was the specific color of giving up. She ordered whatever the well whiskey was and sat down with her ledger notes and started, out of pure reflex, doing the math on how long her savings would last. 4 months, maybe 5 if she skipped the dentist. She was on her 2nd drink and had just discovered a discrepancy in her notes, something she'd flagged internally 3 times and been ignored on, when a man sat down beside her without asking if the seat was taken. She didn't look up. The bar was half empty. He had options. "You're in my seat," he said. "There are 11 other seats. That one's mine." Thea looked up then. Not because she was intimidated. She wasn't, particularly, or at least she told herself she wasn't, but because the voice was the kind that assumed it would be listened to, and she wanted to see what kind of man made that assumption in a basement bar at 4 in the afternoon. He was older than her, mid-40s, she guessed. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once, and was now something more interesting, a scar that ran jaw to cheekbone on the left side, dark eyes with the focused quality of someone who made lists and kept them, dark coat, no logo, the kind of no lego that cost more than her monthly rent. 2 men behind him standing by the wall, pretending not to watch. "It wasn't taken," she said. "Your name isn't on it." "My name is Ronan Vael," he said. And in this city, that is more or less the same thing. Thea had lived in Toronto her whole life and had never heard the name Ronan Vael. She told him so. Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't tell if it was annoyance or the faintest edge of something else. "Then you're either very sheltered or very new." "Neither. I'm a bookkeeper. I work in finance." She paused. "I did. As of 3 hours ago, I'm apparently in a career transition." He looked at the ledger notes spread across the bar. Then he sat down, not in her seat, in the one beside it, and ordered something she didn't catch in a voice that assumed it would arrive correctly. It did. "What are you calculating?" he said. "Whether I should give up the dental plan or the transit card first. That's not what that is," he said, nodding at the ledger. She looked at him. "No, it's not." A pause. "What is it?" And here was the thing about Thea. She was not a trusting person. She'd been burned by her employer, her cousin, her mother, and in a particularly memorable incident, in 2021, her landlord, her ex-boyfriend, and a tax accountant in the same calendar month. She did not open up to strangers. She did not share sensitive information. She had exactly the kind of closed-off, nobody-gets-in posture that therapists always told her to work on. She spread the ledger open and showed him the discrepancy anyway. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the fact that she had absolutely nothing left to protect. "Someone's been skimming," she said. "From an operating account that feeds 6 subsidiary holding accounts. It's been happening for 8 months. Small amounts, irregular intervals, just under the audit threshold each time. I flagged it 3 times, in writing. She smoothed the page flat. I found out today that my cousin who replaced me is engaged to the VP, who ignored all 3 flags. The man named Ronan Vael looked at the ledger for a long moment. How much? He said. Total. Best estimate about 2.3 million. He picked up his drink, set it down without drinking. You have documentation. I have everything. I kept copies. I'm very thorough. She said it without pride. It was just true. Thorough was the word teachers had written on her report cards when they meant she was the kind of student they couldn't fault but wouldn't remember. Thorough was what her last performance review had said. The one Mira had apparently borrowed for her own application. I have a problem, Ronan Vael said. That is adjacent to yours. That sounds like something a man says before he makes your problem worse. Usually, yes. He turned to look at her directly for the first time, and she noticed that the scar on his jaw went further than she'd thought, into the collar of his shirt, where it disappeared. But in this case, I have a gap in my accounting department that I've been unable to fill for 6 weeks, because the position requires a specific combination of skills and discretion, and the people who have the skills don't have the discretion, and the people who have the discretion don't have the skills. Thea looked at the 2 men standing by the wall. She looked at the coat with no logo. She looked at the way the bartender had not asked Ronan Vael for his card. What kind of business? She said. A beat. Import and export. Of what? He looked at her. Things that move between places. Right, Thea said. Sure. Import and export. She gathered her ledger notes and began stacking them. I think I'll give up the dental. The salary would cover both. He named a number. She stopped stacking. It was not, technically, an astronomical number. It was the kind of number that meant she could get the tooth looked at and still put something aside. It was the kind of number her job had promised her and never delivered. Dangled for 2 years as a perhaps, let's revisit this, after Q4. Thea, you know how it is. It was the number she'd calculated she needed in the 4th column of the page she was holding. I'd need to see the books, she said. Obviously. All of them. Not a curated version. Something in his expression shifted again, that same unreadable thing. She wondered if anyone else pushed back on him like this, and guessed probably not. Obviously, he said again. And if I find something wrong, I tell you. Not what you want to hear. What's actually there? That, he said, is the entire point. She thought about Mira at her desk. She thought about the VP's signature on the termination notice. She thought about her mother's craft room and the chair Thea used to sit in to do her homework, and the way it had always felt, growing up, like the space she occupied, was temporary, contingent, something someone else might need eventually. She thought about the fact that she had in this cardboard box 6 months of evidence that nobody had wanted to look at. Trial period, she said. 30 days, I see the books, I work the numbers, we evaluate 2 weeks, he said. 25 days. He looked at her for a moment. 3 weeks, he said, and the dental is covered from day 1. Thea Dunbar picked up her mug that said I survived audit season and put it back in the cardboard box. I'll need somewhere to work, she said, with a door that closes. She got the door. The office was on the 43rd floor of a building in the financial district that had no name on its directory. Her access card was matte black and opened things she didn't ask questions about. She was given a desk, a monitor, a secure terminal, and a filing system that was, and she could not stress this enough, a disaster. Not a suspicious disaster, an overwhelmed one. The kind that happened when a department had been understaffed for too long, and the people remaining had been doing 3 jobs each, and cutting corners not out of malice but exhaustion. Thea had seen it before. She'd lived it before. She understood immediately what had happened, and why nothing balanced. She also found in the first 72 hours 4 separate accounting errors that nobody had caught, 3 invoices that had been filed under the wrong entities, and 1 recurring payment to a vendor that had been discontinued in March, but was still being processed every month because no one had updated the system. She fixed them. She documented everything she changed and why. She left notes in the margins in the color-coded system she'd developed at her last job. The one that had taken her 8 months to perfect, and that Mira had photographed and presented to the VP as her own. At the end of the first week, Ronan Vael came to her office. He didn't knock. She gathered that wasn't something he did, but he stopped in the doorway and looked at the whiteboard she'd covered in her reconciliation framework. The February discrepancy, he said, resolved. It was a currency conversion that wasn't being handled consistently between accounts. I standardized the process and back-corrected 6 months. A pause. How long did that take you? 2 hours. She kept her eyes on the screen. It should have been caught in October. He was quiet for a moment. My last accountant had a graduate degree from McGill. Good for him. He missed it for 4 months. I know. I found his notes. She turned around then, because she wanted to look at him when she said the next part. Mr. Vael, I don't have a degree from McGill. I have a diploma from a community college in Scarborough, and 12 years of cleaning up what people with McGill degrees overlooked. I need you to decide right now if that's a problem, because if it is, I'd like to know before I spend another week fixing the March consolidation. He looked at her for a long moment. Is the March consolidation also a problem? It's a significant problem, yes. Then fix it, he said and left. She fixed it. The 3-week trial became a month. The month became 2. Thea stopped counting the days. It wasn't that she forgot to be cautious. She was constitutionally incapable of forgetting to be cautious. It was practically a personality disorder at this point. But the work was good. The work was genuinely, surprisingly good. Not in spite of the complexity, but because of it. There were 12 entities to reconcile across 4 different regulatory frameworks, 2 currencies, and a set of legacy contracts that had been drafted in the 90s and never properly updated. It was the most interesting accounting problem she'd ever touched. She acknowledged privately while eating a vending machine sandwich at her desk at 9 on a Wednesday, possibly the happiest she'd been in years. She did not examine this too closely. She learned things about the nature of the business gradually, the way you learn most things, not in one revelation, but in accumulation. She understood, for instance, that import and export covered a range of activities, some of which would not appear in any customs documentation. She understood that the 2 men who stood by walls were not assistants. She understood that when people called the office and asked for Vail's assistant, they meant her, and that what they wanted was never filing. She developed a system. She kept 2 sets of notes, one for what she was asked to do, and one for what she observed while doing it. The second set she kept in a paper ledger she brought from home, the same kind she'd used at her last job, spiral-bound with a green cover. She told herself it was professional habit. She did not examine this too closely either. Ronan Vael was not, she discovered, what she'd initially assumed. She had assumed a certain type, blunt, territorial, operating on the premise that money and threat were the same thing. He was those things sometimes, but he was also methodical in a way that surprised her. He read contracts carefully before signing. He asked questions before making decisions, and not rhetorical questions, actual questions, the kind that meant he was genuinely calculating something. He remembered numbers. He remembered what she told him, verbatim, sometimes weeks later. He called her Dunbar. She called him Mr. Vael. He asked her once to use his first name, and she said it didn't feel appropriate, and he looked at her with that expression she still couldn't entirely read and said, "Fine," and never asked again. He came to her office most evenings, not for long, usually to go over something specific, a report she'd flagged, a contract term he wanted clarified, a discrepancy he'd noticed himself. He had a good eye for numbers, she'd give him that, better than most people she'd worked for. "You don't scare easily," he said one evening, sitting across the desk while she walked him through the quarterly projection. "I scare normally," she said. "I just don't show it. There's a difference. There's a significant difference." She turned a page. The Q4 projections assume the Brantford contract closes on schedule. If it doesn't, we're looking at a cash flow gap. In December, I'd recommend building a reserve. It'll close. I'd still recommend the reserve. He was quiet. Then, build it. She made a note. Also, the Malta entity hasn't filed in 11 months. That's going to attract attention. The Malta entity is complicated. The Malta entity is a liability. Complicated is not a regulatory category. She looked up. I can fix it, but I need to know the full history. All of it. Not the version that makes it look simple. He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look. This was, she had found the essential skill with Ronan Vael. You held the look. He was used to people looking away first. When she didn't, something happened in his expression. Something small, not warmth exactly, but an acknowledgement. Like a ledger entry being accepted. I'll send you the full file, he said. Thank you. He stood, paused at the door. The woman your cousin replaced you with, he said. The VP. What's his name? She told him. Vael said, which was not a sound she could interpret, and left. 2 weeks later, she got an email from a journalist she'd never contacted, asking if she wanted to comment on an anonymous tip that had been sent to the Ontario Securities Commission regarding unusual activity in the operating accounts of her former employer. The email contained, as an attachment, a partial scan of documents she recognized. She stared at the email for a long time. Then she typed, "No comment," and closed her laptop and went back to the Malta file. In January, she found something she hadn't been looking for. She'd been reconciling the November cash flow and had flagged an outgoing transfer. Not because it was irregular, it wasn't. The amount and account were both on record, but because the receiving account name had changed since the last transfer. Same number, different name. She ran it back. The account had changed names twice in the past 18 months. Both times, immediately after a large deposit. Both times, the new name was a numbered company with no traceable directors. She sat with this for 3 days. Then she made an appointment. Vail's assistant, his actual assistant, a taciturn man named Briggs, who had worked for Vael for 11 years and communicated primarily through silence, looked at her when she came to the door and said, "He's expecting you." She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She sat down across from Vail's desk, the real desk, in his actual office, which was cleaner than hers and had no whiteboard and looked like the office of a man who kept everything in his head and put the file on the table. "I found something," she said. "I know." She looked at him. "You flagged the account name change," he said. "My system catches flags. You've been watching my work." "I watch all work. It's not personal." He picked up the file and opened it. "Tell me what you think." "I think," she said carefully, "that someone with access to this account is moving money through it in a way that doesn't appear in any of the books I've been given. Which means either you know about it and you're watching me to see if I find it, or you don't know about it, and someone in your organization is running a secondary ledger you're not aware of." Silence. "Either way," she said. "I need to know which one before I decide what to do next." Ronan Vael looked at the file. He looked at it for long enough that she counted her own heartbeats. 9, 10, 11. And then he set it down and looked at her and said, "It's the second one." She breathed. "All right, I've had a suspicion for 4 months. I haven't been able to find the entry point. I can find it." She leaned forward slightly. "But I need access to everything. The full Cayman structure, the numbered company registry. Everything you told me was off limits when I started." He looked at her. "If I give you that, you know things that make it difficult for you to walk away. I'm aware. I need to know why you'd take that risk." She thought about it. It was a fair question. She gave him the fair answer. "Because someone is stealing from you using the same method someone stole from my last employer. And both times people decided it wasn't worth looking at. I'm very bad at letting that go." A long pause. "Also," she said, "the dental coverage is excellent, and I've been putting off a crown since March." Something happened in Vail's expression. She'd seen it before, that small, almost nothing shift, but this time it went a little further. Not a smile. Something adjacent to one. "I'll send you the access codes tonight," he said. "Thank you." She stood up at the door. She turned. "Mr. Vael, when I find the entry point, and I will find it, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is and what it means, not what's convenient, what's there." "I know," he said. "It's why I hired you." She found it in February. A nested holding account inside the Cayman structure, fed by microtransfers spread across 9 months and 43 separate transactions, all just under the threshold that would have triggered internal review. It was, she had to admit, technically impressive. It was also cross-referenced with the discrepancy she'd found at her previous employer, the work of the same hand. She knew that hand. She'd worked beside it for 2 years. She brought Vael the full report on a Thursday morning, printed and bound, with the documentation in the appendix and her own 3-page summary up front, written the way she wrote everything. No interpretation, only facts, organized in the order they'd been discovered. She watched him read it. He went very still around page 2. Mira, he said. She was the VP's contact. The same method, a more sophisticated version. She's been running it across 2 organizations simultaneously. Thea kept her voice even. She had access to this organization through a contract that was signed 18 months ago, before I was hired. Vael set the report down. His face was very calm. She knew by now that very calm meant a specific thing. I need you to not do anything yet, she said. He looked at her. I know that's not how you operate, she said. I know what you would normally do, and I'm asking you not to. Because if you handle it the way you usually handle things, the documentation disappears, and the OSC investigation loses its corroborating evidence, and my former employer's VP walks away clean and does it again somewhere else. What you're describing takes months, he said. 8 to 12 weeks. I've already made the call. Silence. You called the regulator, he said. I provided documentation to the journalist, who provided it to the regulator. Yes, 3 days ago. She held his gaze. The Vael organization is not named. You're a third party whose accounts were accessed without authorization. If you cooperate, which means giving me 8 weeks to finish building the paper trail, you come out of this as a victim of financial fraud, not a participant. Vael looked at her for a very long time. You did this before you told me, he said. I did. That's a significant decision to make unilaterally. I know. If you want to terminate my contract over it, I understand. She didn't look away. I'd do it again. Another long pause, and then Ronan Vael picked up the report and said, Page 11. Walk me through the Cayman reconciliation. She walked him through it. In March, the VP was suspended pending investigation. In April, Mira was named as a person of interest in an OSC inquiry that expanded to 3 organizations. In May, Thea got a call from a law firm she'd never heard of representing a client she'd never met, asking if she'd be willing to consult on a complex multi-jurisdictional accounting review. She called Vail's office to let Briggs know she'd be taking a meeting off-site. Briggs said, He'd like you to come up first. She went up. Vael was standing at the window. Toronto in May, grey and pale, the lake visible at the edge of the city. The Pierce firm, he said without turning. They're good. The case will take 2 years minimum. I know. You'd be leaving here. She stood by the door. My contract doesn't have a non-compete clause. You didn't include one. I know I didn't. He turned then. I'm asking if you're leaving, not if you're allowed to. She looked at him. She thought about the 43rd floor, with no name on the directory, and the 12 entities, and the Malta problem she'd finally resolved in February, and the filing system that had been a disaster, and that was now something she was genuinely proud of. She thought about the fact that for 2 years she'd worked for people who hadn't wanted to see what she found, and that Vael, whatever else he was, had always wanted exactly that. She thought about the way he'd said I know when she'd told him she'd go to the regulator, and how it hadn't been approval. Exactly, but it had been. She looked for the word recognition, the specific way one careful person recognizes another. The Pierce case is interesting, she said, but it's a 2-year engagement with a fixed end date, and this one doesn't have one, he said. The Malta situation alone will take 18 months minimum, yes. She looked at the window. The lake was a flat grey line. I'd want to renegotiate salary, she said, obviously, and I'd want it in writing that I maintain independent reporting authority. My findings go to you directly. No filters. Those were always my terms. I want them documented. Something almost happened in his expression. Have Briggs draft it, he said. You'll review the language, she said. I'm very thorough. I know, said Ronan Vael. It's why you're still here. She went back to her office on the 43rd floor and sat down at her desk and opened the ledger, the green spiral-bound one she'd brought from home, and made a note in the margin of the last entry. Then she closed it and opened the Malta file and kept working, because the numbers were still there and they still needed to balance. And this, she had decided, was exactly where she was supposed to be.